Let's see if we can do a midget intro. A small intro, you can call it. It's 2023, and I still have this midget. And in fact, I'm still working on it, among other things. And right now, we're finally putting a brand new wiring harness on it and addressing everything on the way. The windshield ended up being removed to get at some body work I couldn't get to. We'll just show a little bit here of where we are and what we're doing at the moment. This makes more sense when you look at it from up here. But here's the thing. I've taken a lot of video of building this midget. It's got a lot of modifications. And I've probably got a little video for almost all of them. And so let's go back to maybe not the very beginning, but back in the days, early days of COVID, this thing was sort of parked under a tarp structure, out of the way, project in waiting. And then it snowed and the tarp structure collapsed on it. and then COVID came along, and that March I decided, all right, I got this thing in bits. It'd been sitting outside, somewhat tarped until the snow dumped on it. The top was on, the engine wasn't in it. It was all, like I said, in bits. And so I thought, well, since we're stuck at home, I'm going to see if I can put this together in a couple of months and make it drivable. And I did. And I took video along the way, and here we are now, 2023. Let's go back and have a look at some of the things that made this thing here as we kind of walk around it and see its current state. But I hope you find it interesting and understand that if the references talk about these times and all that kind of stuff, it was the lockdown era. And I was lucky to be able to get people like Will at Rivergate, supporting the 5-speed in this thing, to send me parts that March, April, May of 2020. But here we are 3 years later. Progress is still slow, but it's effective, and there's some really interesting modifications I've done to this thing. It's a fabulous little car. We'll talk about it. Let's start here. But that's enough in the news. Let's concentrate on the fun stuff. I went ahead and ran this engine without installing this plate to have a look at how well the existing standard arrangement is. If you follow me at all, I've made no secret of liking the standard design on these, and I think that a lot of the bad reputation and the problem people have with them comes from setting them up wrong, not paying attention to sealing up those gaps and getting that full continuous scroll circle around it. Now, I've always said also that I really like these Rivergate kits because it's kind of the best of all worlds. It's the only arrangement that leaves the existing arrangement alone. Most of these aftermarket kits that put these plates on the flywheels end up removing that scroll to give the kit some place to bolt and just opening it up. That just gushes oil into the back, leaving this seal as the only recourse. In this case, I verified running this engine, it didn't leak. I mean, the tiniest amount of oil, or I seriously considered leaving this off because that oil makes its way out forward, doesn't go into the clutch. By design, these things have an open scroll there. It's fine to leave it. And I'm always concerned about that oil getting out of the standard arrangement and basically being trapped behind the seal. There is no place for it to go unless it leaks out. There's no place for it to return to the pan. And in fact, some of these, if they're set up clumsy, you could see this area back here being full, and that's why they tell you to seal the threads of these flywheel bolts. If you put the flywheel bolts in without sealing the threads and there's pressure and oil in there, it's going to walk right out of every one of those threads, and that will get into the clutch. It comes out the wrong side of this arrangement here, right into the clutch disc. So pay attention to the details here. Make sure you seal these threads however you go about this, assuming you're using this seal. And so here we are. I've installed the throwout bearing I got from Will at Rivergate. Thanks very much, Will, at these times to send me the bits I needed. And so I'm going to go ahead and install the flywheel here. I cleaned up the surface of the flywheel, cleaned up the ring gear, and applied my light coat of metallic blue like I like to do just to abbreviate the rust. We'll get this installed, set up the clutch, the bits here, and somewhere over there is the 5-speed. I'll drag it up, line it up to the back of this engine, and get ready to throw it into the front of that car. Progress, progress. attention to everything that is a lot harder to see once it's in the car. Sitting right here waiting. Here we go. 1275. And the little Nissan Datsun 5-speed from the old 210s. Whew. This was more difficult than I thought when the instructions with the Rivergate kit said it's a tight fit. I'm glad I didn't take the time to straighten all this out when I noticed the front of this being banged up. I thought, well, we'll see. But sure enough, man, you had to turn this quite steeply downward. You get to the point, I don't know if the 5-speed makes it that much tighter than the standard rib case. I imagine it's tight either way. But there we are, motor mounts installed. Here's one little tip. It's the first time I've actually installed one of these. I've built probably dozens of these, but I've never actually put one in a car. Here's one area I noticed whoever pulled this out just kind of put a hoist to this and yanked it. I only had one of these mounts, probably because I had to rip one up. You can't set it straight down into the rubber mounts. And so this side frame bracket, very easy to remove, 3 bolts. They have captive nuts underneath. That's the way to get at it. Forget about trying to push it in straight down when the 2 bolts go in at a pretty severe horizontal angle. Engine in, Datsun 5-speed transmission in, shifter installed. Still need seats. And now I want to install the right front replacement fender. And so I have cleaned up all of the areas underneath that you can't get to when there's a fender here. In remarkable condition, this one. A couple of people looked at it. Brendan from Mini Mania is like, wow. Usually you find the fuse box lid, a few tools that you've dropped, and holes from the rust where the water can't get out. But boy, this one's in great shape. It should be a fun little car. I'm finding all sorts of odd little things as you do. I've actually never had a midget. I've only driven 2 of these for a very short period of time in my whole life. So this should be a fun thing to put together and see what it turns into. Do I hesitate to show this part? Okay, the previous owner did an ill-advised junkyard plastic, who knows what, radiator that just managed to shoehorn in there. Then installed an electric fan, which then hit the radiator because things weren't positioned properly and clearance properly. Is this any less ill-advised? I don't know, remains to be seen. But at least this is a mini, super cool radiator, which is a 2-core, should be certainly adequate for 1275, and this will be an interesting test. So I've got it hung in there to clear the fan. It'll work enough to test this thing, and there's a number of other things with this car that I'm concerned about. One, a 3.7 rear end was installed. It's bound to be a dog, and we've installed the Datsun 5-speed. A rebuilt 1275, not a hot rod despite the look of this Weber. Right now, I just installed the slave cylinder from Rivergate. Thank you very much there, Will. I really appreciate it. Having acquired this car, of course, in bits and pieces and needing a few things, here we are, repurposing. After working the bubbles out, this thing that sat for a while, what I'm able to do is pump the I've got the hose attached to the slave cylinder bleeder. And so at some point I'm able to just pump fluid through without losing, once the fluid's clean, you needn't throw away the brake fluid, and eventually we'll work the bubble out of the master cylinder. It's not making pressure yet, and so we're making that work. A power bleeder isn't to be had at the moment, but we've got an air compressor and a variety of ways of applying a small amount of pressure to help that fluid through some of these. I know these can be tricky, but we'll get it here. We're close to driving. What other fun are we having? Trying to decide if we're upholstery people. Yeah, it's been said that I could do it. I'm sure I could. Do I have the patience? We've got a few of the bits. We'll have to acquire a few more. Our lovely assistant said, throw a t-shirt over it and call it good, and we certainly may do that for testing purposes to see what else this thing's going to need as we make that progress. Yeah, that eyesore fender there needs to be a similar color. I actually like the color of that better than I do this, but I think it would be harder to paint the car than the fender. So we'll see what happens here. All right. Here we we go, with a foot. Look at that. Ready for gas. So this car hasn't been registered in a number of years, maybe not quite that many. And so look at that. Car registered, sticker in hand, just got off the phone with Haggerty. Everything's going swimmingly on a day when the stock market plunged 7%. But hey, there's always some good news if you look for it. Let's get this puppy on the road for the first time in many years. You can see that we've thrown in, the seats weren't awful. All right, they're pretty awful. And then I left them outside to make them even worse. But you can see the his and hers seat covers. And I started working on this door panel, and we replaced this fender. Yeah, I know the paint doesn't match perfectly, but it's a work in progress. Those are the things that aren't perfect. I thought, well, hey, let's put this to the test. What if the Mini had this same radiator mounted in front, where it gets cool airflow from the direction of travel instead of trying to shove air out the fender like it does in a Mini? But it's just temporary. I'm actually going to fit something in here as a crossflow that's better than the available units for this. Hey, let's sneak in a quick update here. Probably weeks have gone by. I've been driving it around a little bit here. It's a funny little car. I'll do a more detailed review of it. But this one, though it has low miles and is, the body, the lack of rust, things like that are pretty amazing. I believe it to be the original engine. Standard bore, 1275. Overkill over here, I mentioned before. This is from my test stand, a 45 DCOE. What I have had success with, though, is running a single 40. And so I've got one sitting over here that is going to take the exact same linkage. So I'm about to switch this one for a smaller one and see if we can get a little bit more reasonable street behavior out of this. Let's do a quick thing here. We haven't shown too much of it running, but I think, let me see, I went ahead and disconnected part of the throttle over here, and I disconnected the electric fuel pump. Let's just reach in. I got the packet. See what this does with a 40 in place of this 45. And I believe that to be the original 3.9 from this car. It came with it. This is kind of an example of maybe trying a little too hard to drop your RPMs in these old small engine little sports cars. Mini Coopers the same way. People are always clamoring to install a set of gears that'll let you go down the freeway at reasonable engine speed. Just can't pull fifth gear with a 3.7, as someone put in here, trying too hard to make it a freeway car. It's perfectly happy going with the engine spinning faster, and that's the goal here, a 3.9. I still thought a 4.2 would be more spirited. Of course, this is the non-glamorous part here. I spent some quality time under here today, getting this surface cleaned up from previous installations and such. This should be a nice improvement to this midget that's getting a lot better here now that we've got it on the road.